Good morning.
Good morning.
Glad you all could be out this morning. This morning I would like to talk to you about one of the mightiest kings in the Bible, King Nebuchadnezzar. And I think we can draw a lot of strengths and we can look at a lot of weaknesses that Nebuchadnezzar had. In Daniel chapter 4, the first 4 chapters of the book of Daniel tell the story of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was a mighty and powerful king, and he reigned in 605 BC. He defeated Pharaoh Necho of Egypt and brought Judah under his control. It was during this time that the first Jewish captives were carried away to Babylon. In this group were the young men Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All of this took place fulfilling the prophecy made to King Hezekiah over 100 years before it happened. In Isaiah 39, 3 through 6 it reads, "Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and said to him, 'What did these men say, and from where did they come to you?' So Hezekiah said, 'They came to me from a far country. They came from Babylon.' And he said, 'What have they seen in your house?' So Hezekiah answered, 'They have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shown them.' Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, 'Hear the words of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord.'" Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He was a very arrogant and pompous ruler. Under his reign, Babylon had crushed all her enemies. History records that he never lost a battle. Despite he was generally benevolent to the people that he conquered, but he also was personally cruel, violent, and vindictive. He once roasted 2 young men in a fire. In Jeremiah 29:22, "And because of them a curse shall be taken up by all the captivity of Judah who are in Babylon, saying, The Lord make you like Zedekiah and Ahab, whom the king of Babylon roasted in the fire." And we all know the story that he cast Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into a fiery furnace, and that's in Daniel 3. And in his final conquest of Jerusalem, he had King Zedekiah's sons killed right before his eyes, and then put out the king's eyes before taking him to Babylon. Then in 2 Kings 25, 1 through 21, we read of the captivity of Judea. "Now it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army came against Jerusalem and encamped against it. And they built a siege wall against it all around. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine had become so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then the city's walls were broken through, and all the men of war fled at night by way of the gate between the 2 walls, which was by the king's garden. Even though the Chaldeans were still encamped all round against the city, and the king went by way of the plains, but the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king, and they overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from him. So they took the king and brought him to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they pronounced judgment on him. Then they killed his sons before his eyes, put out his eyes, and bound him with brass fetters, and took him to Babylon. Pretty brutal man. And then it continues. In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem. All the houses of the great he burned with fire, and all the armies of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls of Jerusalem all around. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the captain of the guard, carried away, or Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard carried away captive to the rest of the people who remained in the city, and the defectors who had deserted to the king of Babylon, with the rest of the multitudes. They captured the whole city, brought it in, they stole everything out of the temple, stole all the brass, stole all the gold, and everything within there was, it was massive. They took away the pots, the shovels, the trimmers, the spoons, and all the bronze utensils which the priests ministered with, the fire pans and the basins and the things of solid gold and solid silver, and the captain of the guard took away all those things. There was 2 pillars and the carts that went in there, and Solomon had made all these things for the house of the Lord, and they were bronze articles that was beyond measure. And the captain of the guard took Syria, the king, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, and the third, and 3 doorkeepers. He also took out of the city an officer who had charge of the men of war, 5 men of the king's close associates who were found in the city, the chief recruiting officer of the army who mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the city. So Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, took these and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. Then the king of Babylon struck them and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. Thus Judah was carried away captive from its own land. Now I want you to think about something. You've seen all the things this man's done, all the people that he's killed. Could you think there was any chance that a cold, heartless leader could be changed by God's discipline? Let's go on. The Bible tells us of 2 previous times that Nebuchadnezzar was convicted by God. And one of them was in Daniel 2:47. The king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." And then the second time was when he threw Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego in the furnace, and they survived. And that's in Daniel 3:28 through 29. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angels and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's words and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver this." How soon we forget. And these lessons failed to sink in to Nebuchadnezzar, and they failed to have any lasting results in his life. As chapter 4 opens, Nebuchadnezzar is recording what happened to him. He wrote that he was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. With Babylon well fortified and his mighty army to defend it, he had nothing to fear. He was safe and secure. Sometimes we feel safe maybe in our condition. I know before I became a Christian, I felt I was okay. I felt everything was going fine. Nebuchadnezzar felt the same way. He just felt that everything's good. I'm good. In history, God uses varied methods for getting man's attention. He called Moses in a most dramatic way through a burning bush. Some were very simple, like when he visited Abraham on the plains of Mamre. To unsettle the pride, boastful king of Babylon, God used a simple dream. Nebuchadnezzar was so disturbed over the dream that he called for his wise men to interpret the dream, but they all failed. Finally, Daniel was called to interpret the king's dream. Nebuchadnezzar related his dream to Daniel in Daniel 4:10 through 17. I'm paraphrasing here. The king saw a large tree under which the beasts of the field slept, and birds nested in its branches. God commanded that the tree be cut down, but the stump was to be left and protected. At that point, the figure of the stump was changed to a man who was given a heart of an animal. The man would remain in this condition for 7 years. When he first heard the dream, he was astonished. Through God's power, Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Daniel told the king that he was the tree that had grown strong and powerful. The cutting down of the tree to the stump that became a man meant that Nebuchadnezzar would be driven from among men and would live with the animals. Nevertheless, during this time, his kingdom would be kept secure for him, meaning that the stump was protected. Daniel told the king that God would do this to humble the arrogant king, so that he would know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Daniel warned the king that unless he turns away from sin towards righteousness, his kingdom would be taken from him. None of what Daniel described to Nebuchadnezzar had to happen. However, he did not listen to Daniel. He didn't listen to the warning, and 1 year later, every detail of Daniel's prophecy came true. As Nebuchadnezzar was walking through his palace again, admiring his accomplishments, he failed to acknowledge that it was God who raised him up to rule over Babylon. So this illness was struck on him, and he was changed into basically a cow that grazed in the field and ate grass for 7 years. At the end of the 7-year period, Nebuchadnezzar's illness left him just as quickly as it came upon him. As he looked up into the heavens, his understanding returned to him, and he immediately began to proclaim the glory of God. He also worshiped God, and every indication is that he continued to do this throughout the remainder of his life. It finally sunk in. It finally changed his life. 7 years of eating grass it took to make him finally come to his senses. The last picture we have of this one wicked and cruel king is that he had been made a true believer in God. Now let's look at some of the lessons that we can learn from this lesson. One of the most important lessons from this story is about the sovereignty of God. Nebuchadnezzar was lifted up with pride, but God humbled him through that terrible illness. And he was forced to acknowledge that God is sovereign. Nebuchadnezzar learned that the sky is not the limit, God is. One day he was admiring all of his accomplishments in his palace, and the next moment he was eating grass like a cow. 7 years later, with his mouth still full of grass, he looked into heaven and his illness goes away. Solomon wrote, "There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord counsels that will stand." Proverbs 19:21. There is nothing wrong with making plans and having dreams for the future. But those plans had better start and end with God. Years ago, it was common for people to end their letters with the letters DV, which stood for the Latin phrase Deo volente, meaning God willing. And that should be our prayer and our attitude all the time, that God's will take place in our life. And that's why I had Mike read that verse, because these men, I'll read it again. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. They made great plans. And how many of us make plans to go on vacation? We make a plan, maybe a year ahead of time maybe we'll make a plan to go on vacation. We're going to go see this. We're going to go do that. We're going to go do this. We pack up the car and we go. But we don't know whether we're going to make it to that destination. We don't know whether we're going to even breathe another breath after we make the plan. Yet these men decided they were going to be there for a year, and they even decided they were going to make money too, without even considering God in the equation. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. Let's think about this morning. God's up in heaven right now, and He's looking down on you. And His assessment of you is, I wish blank. I want you to put your name in there. I wish that, your name, he or she would wake up and really start living their life for me. I wish they would dedicate their whole life to me and not just give me the leftovers. I wish they would come to Bible class and attend all services and stop acting like Nebuchadnezzar. Or maybe, just maybe, I should make them eat grass for 7 years. But the truth of the matter is, and the truth of this story is, there is a far worse fate that could come to you than eating grass for 7 years. Now that sounds pretty bad, standing in a field eating grass. But there's something that is even worse than that. And that is being cut off from God. We talked this morning in class about heaven being light and no darkness ever being in there, because what happens in darkness? Sin. And Greg brought up the point, which was a very good point. The reason it's dark is because there's an absence of God.
In hell.
In hell, yeah. In hell, yeah. That's the darkness. That is the absence of God. Not in heaven, in hell. Thank you, Charles. And the truth of the matter is, we are the ones that are going to make up our mind whether we're the called, the chosen, and whether we're going to live faithful. This morning you have an opportunity to make that decision. We can baptize you if you need be, or maybe you've been baptized and maybe God's up there saying, I wish, I wish, I wish. If you have a need this morning, please come as we stand and sing.